Half the time they feel like when a young person is against a policy being put in place or against certain actions or inactions of government, it is you fighting the government. It is you being against the government of the day. And they find ways to throw in a divide and conquer situation wherein the youths are no longer united because they worry and they fear for the fact that once there is unity amongst the youth, like we saw towards the beginning of the NSAS in 2020, then something drastic could happen.
This season of the Unamplified podcast is sponsored by the GIZ African Union Aware Project. A project aims to strengthen women's representation and participation in political processes.
Hello, Africa. Welcome to another episode of the Unamplified podcast. My name is Cynthia Mbamalu, your host, and with me today I have my co-host.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Unamplified podcast. My name is Queen CY, always coming with the vibes.
Yes, and today we're discussing youth and their influence in the space. So we're looking at the power of the voice, we're looking at the influence of the voice, we're looking at Gen Zs especially, because if you think about the recent protests we've experienced, be it in Kenya, be it the NSAS in Nigeria, be it the protests. I know we had one not long ago in South Africa, and you've seen that increasingly we're seeing younger people speaking up, leading protests and getting involved and engaged, especially demanding for things to work for them. Yeah. And so today we'll be talking about youth. Are you excited?
I'm very much excited.
Yeah. And so Africa, for instance, we're known as a young continent. Data indicates that about 3/4 of the population in Africa are made up of persons between 35 years and below. And in fact, the projection indicates that by 2030, Africa's youth would constitute about 42% of the world youth. So you can imagine that by 2030, the whole population of youth in the world, Africa alone as a continent, will contribute about 42% of that number. And so we cannot talk about leadership development. We cannot talk about Africa without having a big, deep, and broad conversation about young people in Africa. And today we'll be discussing youth and the influence of voice. And we have three powerful guests joining us from Nigeria, Kenya, and Sierra Leone. I'll hand it over to Quincy.
Yes, actually, we have Abba Itodo. He said we should call him Itodo. He is an experienced broadcast journalist and a communication strategist. And also we have from Sierra Leone, we have Sam Esakabo. She is an executive director, Girls Advocacy Development Network. Welcome, Itodo and Samesta, to the Unamplified podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and all the way from South Africa. I have a special love for South Africa. I'll talk about it later. We have Kenya Burns. You know, the other surname, I promise you guys, I promise this surname. It has the click sound. I'll leave it for her to pronounce for us. But she's a grassroots mobilizer. She's an active voice in the politics in South Africa. But she's one of the young women leading and promoting social change and transformation. Kenya, it's good to have you on the Unamplified podcast.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and like we just said, we're discussing youth and influence of voice. We've seen how young people are consistently leading movements, organizing and making demands for things to work. In fact, last year in Nigeria, we had the End Bad Governance protest, which did not go as we had planned. But then again, a lot of young people also expressed fears and worries. We've seen in Kenya, young people have been consistently protesting. And so my question, I'll begin with Itodo and then I'll move to Kenya. Do you think our leaders are listening to young people? Do you think the voices of the youth are being heard on the continent?
Well, I'd say yes, they can hear what we're saying. They can hear the complaints, the suggestions, and the way things should be for Nigerians in this regard and Africa as a whole. But are they listening to put any action into place? Not necessarily. Half the time, they feel like when a young person is against a policy being put in place or against certain actions or inactions of government, it is you fighting the government. It is you being against the government of the day. And they find ways to throw in a divide and conquer situation wherein the youths are no longer united because they worry and they fear for the fact that once there is unity amongst the youth, like we saw towards the beginning of the NSAS in 2020, then something drastic could happen. I recall sometime this week, a senator representing the FCT made reference to the fact that young people in Nigeria talk a lot and there is no action to the talk. So it means they can hear what we're saying. They know what is required to be done. But then they just worry that if we talk and don't see the action, we talk and talk and talk, and then we move on quickly to other things because there's so much happening. But when we talk as a united front, regardless of ethnicity or tribe, which half the time, religion, I beg your pardon, which half the time tends to be a driving force for disunity, then they will be forced to, beyond listening, putting in the action that's required and called for.
Wow. So Itodo said, like, the reference to the senator one, that young people is all talk, no action.
Yes.
So, I mean, from that, it means they can hear us. They can hear young people, but then we can't seem to see that incentive on their part to take action.
Exactly.
I'll bring in Kanya. Now, from your experience in South Africa, I know I was there for your last elections, and there was some level of youth enthusiasm, right? And I was just wondering, with the several protests that has happened, with the demands that we've seen, do you think young South Africans are being heard? And are their voices creating some sort of change, especially with respect to how politicians or the political class engage with the youth?
Thank you for that question. So I think in South Africa, when it comes to young people being engaged, particularly in the political space, we've just seen a trend where people are not registering to vote. They're not showing up to vote, even if they do register. And I think a lot of people in South Africa have then said that young people are apathetic, but I don't necessarily think that that is true. I think what young people in South Africa are doing is organizing outside of formal political structures, because from the work that I have done as a grassroots activist, where we did over 100 communities during the 2024 election, young people consistently said to us, we don't trust our political systems, we don't trust the current political parties. So young people are looking for alternatives where they feel like they will be represented and where they will be heard. So what's kind of happened in South Africa is where young people are then treated like a token. Young people have, all we've known, for example, is this democracy. All we've known is post-1994 South Africa. And so all we also know in South Africa right now as young people is the corruption. All we know in South Africa is the healthcare system falling apart. All we know in South Africa is fees must fall. But then we also expected to be the foot soldiers of democracy. So we feel as though the older generation who's in the political systems, they don't see young people for the true value that they bring. If in order you want to hear young people, we must be given strategic decision-making positions so that we also heard at the table. So we also deserve an equal seat at the table to be making the decisions and not just be used as numbers. So I think I want to agree as well with what the previous speaker has said. I think one thing that we are currently trying to organize for in South Africa is a generational mission. I think pre-1994 South Africa, the mission and the generational goal was very clear, was to bring an end to the apartheid system. But now post-1994, I think South Africans, and particularly young people, aren't having enough conversations about what is our generational mission for a new South Africa and what would we like out of our country.
Yeah, you talked about the generational mission. And I'm hoping that a lot of young people, not just from South Africa, but within our respective countries, can listen and understand that we have a mission as a generation. I think it was Frantz Fanon that had that quote that every generation must out of relative opacity realize its mission. You either fulfill or betray your mission. And I think for a lot of young people within the younger generation, that consciousness, that reawakening is what we need, especially if we want the system to work for us. And I'll bring in Sam Esther. I'm in Sierra Leone. Sam Esther, I ran into we met, thankfully, some years ago here in Nigeria. And when I was in Sierra Leone for your elections also, you were an amazing host. But I've seen you engaging young women, especially Gen Z women in Sierra Leone. Do you think your government listens to young people in Sierra Leone? And do you think their voices or young people, their issues are being heard?
Thank you very much. So for us in Sierra Leone, I would say there has been an improvement, in terms of listening to the voice of young people, especially in terms of young women. And that's why during the 2023 election, we have a high increase of women's participation, especially young women participation, being elected at cabinet level and also owning other positions such as ministerial position. And I think during that time that we had the election, we saw that there was a push of our act, which is the Women's Empowerment Act, which was passed. And that really gave, leverage of 30% quota, for women to stand in position. So I think this really, really helped us to have the representation that we are having, than previous year. We have the youngest young female parliamentarian. She's just 26 years old. So that really shows you that there has been an improvement in terms of encouraging, young female, leadership in terms of political representation. Our government is really doing well, and I want to say kudos to them. Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like Sierra Leone has a slightly positive, but I will come back to drill into this positivity you have brought in. But I love that, Quincy. Why?
For me, I will disagree with Itodo. You said that the governments are listening to us, but I don't think they are listening to us.
Oh, you don't think at all? Because you said they are listening, but they're not taking action.
Taking actions. Yes, that's the thing. When you're listening and you're not taking action, it means you're not listening. You cannot say you're listening to me and I'll be screaming, I'll be shouting, I'll be doing everything and you're not doing anything about it.
So if I'm having a conversation with you right now,
yeah.
Yes, I'm telling you things about what's happening in the country, you're listening to me.
Exactly.
But if you don't do anything about it, it means you're not taking any action. So you're listening just to go on with what it is that you're used to.
Yeah.
But if you listen and take action, so listening cuts across, different options or different definitions. You're listening, but you're not doing anything. So they're listening, they can hear you. Better still, let's use the word, they can hear you.
Okay, maybe use the word
they can hear you.
Use the word
hear, because they're not doing anything about it.
But I'm already losing hope. I'm already losing hope. That's why I engage myself in different platforms, trying to let them listen to me. And let's even come to the 2023 general elections. We could see that young people, they engage more online. But when it's time to vote, they are not there. We even saw that the statistics of the 2023 general election, it was less than 30% of voters turnout for young people. Why do you think it's like that?
So for starters, the register for the elections are bloated.
Yeah.
The numbers are not tallying with the numbers of people who actually registered to vote. And something else that happened, and based on feedback that we got even during the elections, was the distribution of voter cards. The difficulty in getting your voter cards. And on an election morning, messages were sent to people as to the fact that their voting units and polling units had been changed. So trying to identify or find those polling units proved difficult to a handful of young people. And for those who also believe that whether or not they vote for a particular candidate, it doesn't count as anything because the election umpires will still go on to do what they believe is a better option based on who is the highest bidder or who paid the right funding or whatever it is, right? So all of these factors put together tends to discourage the number of young people who we expect to vote during every election. And what was impressive in the last election, and it may have happened in your polling unit, was a lot of young people waited late into the night to ensure that the results were collated, hoping that it will count for something in the end. Where the trust was lost was how the final collation happened and the eventual announcement. If things were done by the books and done the right way, and if all of the complaints that were put forward during the election while the collation was going on had been listened to and action had been taken, maybe, just maybe, more young people would have believed in the system and would not go on to say in the next elections, I'm not voting because whether or not I vote, it doesn't count. So I think all of the actions and inactions that follow through all of these processes tends to either encourage or discourage young people from indulging or involving themselves in the elections and eventually deciding on who becomes leader, so to speak, right? But there's also the concern around funding some young people want to go into government. They want to run for certain electoral positions, but then they're already discouraged by the amount of funding required for them to get involved or get started.
Yeah.
So that plays a lot of, negative pushback on the numbers that get involved eventually.
Yeah, when I talked about, we had young people that turned out. We had people who basically waited till, I remember I was on a live show through the night and they were covering polling units. And we were seeing young people waiting in some polling units in 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And I was actually inspired by that level of patriotism, right? However, if you look at just those people who come out, you think, oh, you have large turnout. But by the time the numbers came in, the numbers were really poor. About 26% of voter turnout for the presidential election. That's probably among the least in sub-Saharan Africa, because most countries are doing better than we when it comes to turnout. Even South Africans were complaining that they had the lower turnout in the last elections. I think South Africa had about 59% turnout, and that apparently is your lowest since 1994, lowest turnout recorded. But at 59%, they are doing way better than we are. And I get the argument that our register could be over-bloated, but I don't think it's as over-bloated to those percent. At least we should get to 40% turnout. Do you understand? But I totally agree on the fact that people lost hope. I think for a lot of young people, especially for Nigerians, like you said, when they don't think the system will work, when they don't think the results would give you the outcome or would be transparent, I think you made the point that some people already said they will not participate in next elections because of what happened in the last elections. And I'm really hoping Nigerian, you don't give up. Like, we can't say, oh, because the last elections did not go the way we planned, then we'll not engage, because the politicians are getting ready for the next elections. And this brings me to South Africa, to Kenya. You were actively engaging, and I don't know if you have some similar experiences with what Itodo shared, because he talked about funding, for instance, elections are monetized. In South Africa, do you have that sort of experience where it's even expensive for young people, especially young women, to contest in the elections? That's one. And then the second part is, when it comes to turnout, what do you think was the reason for the lower turnout experienced? And are young women engaging differently post these elections that you had last year?
So I think there are a couple of things that contributed to our turnout being low. So one of the first things that we found out from engaging with the citizens in South Africa is that our actual electoral system makes it hard for people to be engaged, because right now a lot of young South Africans feel that they don't see the power that their vote has after the election. So there's a very important conversation that we have been having. I think I'd mentioned to you that I am on a discussion about electoral reform. So we're trying to think about our electoral system in a way that will allow for people to have more power. So for example, in South Africa, we have a proportional representation system. We have closed party list systems. And so what our electoral system has done is given more power to political parties rather than the people. And a lot of the times, the political parties will then opt to account internally rather than to the people that vote for them. So already the minute that young people in South Africa started feeling like their vote no longer has power and that they can't exercise this power after they've casted their vote, they then decided that they need to stay away from the polls, because it became a way of saying, you guys are not doing enough to earn our vote. But also, secondly, there's an organization that is called My Vote Counts, which has done incredible work around the funding of political parties. I also think we face the exact same problem in South Africa in terms of funding, particularly because we have a very high unemployment rate. So even if young people want to contest politics, they are unable to get the finances for it because it becomes a very expensive exercise. And so by virtue of that, they are then excluded. And that's also a symptom of our unemployment rate being so high and the economy in South Africa being quite bad. But I will say, even though we are facing these different challenges, I've met a lot of young women who are organizing for elections. So I know somebody who has been doing work around female reproductive health. So she's been engaging young women on policy concerns about female representation reproductive health, and she's been teaching young girls about the manifesto. So which political parties actually talk about female reproductive health, and why should we choose to vote for these kind of political parties? So we also have young people, for example, who are entering the politics themselves. So in South Africa right now, the average age of our members of parliament is about 50, whereas in South Africa, about 40 million people are under the age of 40. So there's a big mismatch between the people who are in office and majority of the population. And so even when it comes to the gender aspect of it, we had about 43 members of parliament in 2009. It sort of rose in 2019 to be 46%, but after the 24 elections, it's gone down again. So once again, we see that women still lack the critical, they are still not being put in the executive positions. Even if you look at the premiers, 2 out of the 9 provinces have women as premiers. So once again, we still face the gender question. And that's also rather confusing because 55% of our voters' roll is actually women. So there is an inherent issue in the way that the gender plays out in the politics of South Africa. But there are a lot of young people right now who are engaged around the conversations of electoral reform, because then that will allow us to have direct accountability, and it will allow us to demand direct accountability.
Thank you. And I, when I was looking at it, so when you were talking, it's almost like in Nigerian context, unemployment, money, women not included as they ought to be. It's almost like we're in this boat together at this point. I couldn't see why.
So I have a question for Semester. So the Sierra Leone's 2023 election recorded an increased number of women elected in parliament. How did these women engage the election? That's one. And secondly, what conscious effort has been made to elect women in political offices?
So for me, I think, first of all, this is one of the most beautiful elections that Sierra Leone has experienced, because one of which was the women were ready. And also we had collaborated and concerted effort from the NGOs and also government's willingness as well to accept for women to participate. So that was the most beautiful thing. There was readiness, and then also there was this open platform from the civil society and the government. And it came to pass when I was talking about the GIWI Act, which was passed immediately before we went into election. So really that gave women the leverage for them to be able to participate. We have the PR system wherein if 3 candidates are going to stand, one of which will be a female. So, and also political parties were also ensure that they create spaces for women to take position. That's why when you look at our parliament, for 14%, we went straight up to 42%. And even when you look at as well as the cabinet, most of the deputy ministers, most of the ministers are also women, and strategic offices or departments are being led by women. So for us, because of that willingness actually, and then women were ready to take up on the leadership space, I think that's made us have the increase in participation, and also giving the chances for young people, because when you look at my country's population, it is made up of young people, and most of these young people basically are young female. So what happened is that they actually gave us the chance to actually own our initiative. They gave us inclusion. Secondly, they also gave us the funding for us to be able to participate effectively. I remember I was part of the Youth Lab, which EU funded with the Ministry of Youth, wherein they gave funding to young female actually to invent ideas. And I remember one of team, they even came up with an idea of having a robot. The robot was actually going across the streets of Freetown, sending out positive messages. Apart from us owning an initiative as well, most of the observers were young people. Most of the elections officials were actually young people. So we find out that there was so much engagement, like everybody was being involved. And we see the change wherein women are the ones just dancing and giving support to men, whilst women were actually supporting themselves to actually stand in this position places. And we didn't have the difficulty between the older women not trying to give chances to the younger women. We saw wherein the older women were actually giving, the space to younger women to actually participate.
Wow. That's beautiful, I would say. And when you talked about the law that was passed, the gender empowerment, gender equality and women empowerment act. Yeah. I remember it was really celebrated, especially within West Africa, because in Nigeria we've been pushing for legislation. I don't know if we told you, why do Nigerian men not like women?
No, that's a wrong.
I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the
wrong narrative to push out there. I feel like the concern half the time is how she would handle the position. I mean, we've seen women applauded for how well. I mean, I had a conversation recently about if a woman were to be given the position of power, what do people think about her management? And it was impressive, the fact that a lot of men called in to share their thoughts and appreciation if that were to be the case, but also shared reservation as to the fact that since it's not that way right now, the women can influence the men who are in power, their husbands, so to speak, to make decisions that benefit everybody. I'm like, okay, so if you believe the women have this power, how about giving them the power? I know right now there's a push in the National Assembly for specific seats to be reserved for women, which many have reservations about. But the concern is, if that were to be the case, would it in any way improve what we're currently seeing play out? Many will be quick to throw instances at women who have held position of power and being accused of misappropriating funds. But if you put it side by side, the men as well, I think it's only a tiny fraction.
True.
Compared.
Yeah.
But I believe women can do better in terms of supporting their own. A woman would rather support a man for whatever reason, as opposed to supporting another woman who is running for the same position. And you will feel like, because it's the same gender, you should support your own. But I believe everyone has the right and their opinion as to who they think is a better option. But if there's a compulsion to seats being reserved, I feel it would change the narrative to ensuring that more women participate in politics and get elected.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I love the perspective, because I know, the role of the media is powerful. Just having this conversation on air and having different opinions, because it gives you the opportunity to also provide understanding to those who think, support husbands, and you say, no, why not do something? And I totally appreciate that, because we keep telling people that if you trust women to manage a lot of things at different levels, then we need them in power. Because the idea of governance or democracy is that there's equal participation and representation, that you have our government reflecting the society. And so I'm glad we have a voice here talking for us, because we need to get that law passed. Nigeria is so poor. Kenya, you have no idea. Less than 5% women in our parliament. It's 3.9% women in our national parliament. Yes. Is that bad? And so you guys are doing better than we are. You are the reference point for us. We're like in South Africa, in Sierra Leone, in Ghana, in Kenya. Every other country is a reference point. And now let's talk policy. Because in all of this conversation, we talk about youth engagement. I do believe that there's some sort of divide on how young men and young women engage, and even issues that young men would care about will be a bit different from what young women would care about. And I want to get the experience from South Africa. What do young Gen Z women care about as policy issues? And that's one point. And the second for me is, how do we build a conscious movement around these issues that promote the policy issues young women care about, and most importantly, amplifies young women's voices in leadership?
So there's a couple of things that young people are pushing for in South Africa right now. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but South Africa is dealing with a huge crisis when it comes to gender-based violence and femicide. So there's an organization that's run primarily by young women of all races, Black, white, and Indian. And it focuses on sending out petitions to the government for them to declare gender-based violence and femicide to be a national disaster. So that's one of the key campaigns that women in South Africa are working towards right now. Secondly, it's sort of fees must fall, but in a different way, because unfortunately, I was part of the generation who was protesting at fees must fall. And we faced a lot of repression from the state as well as the university. So now we're also being intimidated when we do practice our democratic rights to protest. So I know that there's a lot of young people right now who are looking at accessibility in higher education, but not only accessibility, making sure that young women from rural areas in South Africa are accessing education, but also most importantly, young women who are living with disabilities, because that's also another category of people in our society that we tend to marginalize quite a lot. So those are the key that are happening right now. And then obviously electoral reform is also at the top of the list, particularly also when it comes to healthcare. A lot of young women are concerned about the state of healthcare in South Africa, particularly because the South African government is thinking of introducing the national health insurance. So how are we going to ensure that young people are accessing the healthcare system, but also how do we ensure that the healthcare system is affordable for all South Africans? It cannot be that just because you have money, you can access a better quality of services. So what is actually happening in South Africa right now is that we've seen the power of social media. I think a lot of us were very inspired by Kenya and what the young people in Kenya have been doing in the recent years. So a lot of South Africans right now are using social media, as we've seen that it's a very, very powerful tool. We've seen that even the United States now has started using the social media space for diplomacy, but young people are now starting to do a lot of campaigns on social media, so certain hashtags. So one of the hashtags that we ran last year was called Be on the Side of the Voter, because what we noticed in South Africa is that politicians talk to the voters and voters don't get to talk back. So what we did is that we said that civil society needs to be on the side of the voters, and we need to make sure that the voices of the voters are heard. So there's a lot of campaigns that are going around, particularly through the use of social media, even through the use of TikTok. A lot of young people are using TikTok right now, and there's other innovative strategies that we've employed. So we made a board game for the elections. So it's not to say that South Africans must go and read manifestos one by one, but through the board game that we developed, young people were actually able to learn about the different manifestos, learn about the electoral system in a way that's a bit more fun. And even with things like podcasts, YouTube, even doing regular door-to-door. In South Africa, we have a very big issue with the digital divide, for example. So we still mustn't let go of the traditional mobilizing tactics that were used before. Unfortunately, a lot of South Africans don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to smart devices. So we are still looking at doing a lot of door-to-door and in-person communications, because there's a lot of talking to people rather than people getting to talk back.
Semester, we're still talking policy, right? Are there policy issues? Young, I know you're Gen Z. You're probably the only Gen Z here, because this one's in the studio are my generation, millennials here in the house. I know, and you're a real one, Seth. But we'll not get into the generational war today. We will just respect each other today. But what do you think Gen Z women care about policy-wise? And then secondly, what strategies can we adopt in getting young women involved in the politics?
Okay, so for my country, in terms of policy, even though we are doing well, but there are gaps. So what I really see is towards health-wise, because I see them pushing towards, now we have this thing that it's currently ongoing, which is the Safe Mother Bill, which people tag as the abortion bill. Of course, we have the child rights as well, which is in Parliament to be reviewed to be able to ban FGM.
Itoda, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Do you think Gen Z women engage differently from millennial women?
It's a very interesting question.
Or maybe Gen Z is general.
And I'll tell you this.
And also, maybe when you're done with the question, how do we bridge the gap between generations to amplify our voices?
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. And it's really interesting because it's impressive how the Gen Zs have been able to not wait for the table to invite them, but take their own tables and call out the shortcomings of government. Millennials will typically be patient, and we've been patient for too long, and maybe it's the reason why we are where we are today. If millennials had the tenacity of the Gen Zs, now patience is not a bad thing, but you eating the bone is where the question lies. Is that the best option for you, or you can benefit more by speaking up and taking what you really want for yourself? I think a couple of weeks ago, or months ago, thereabouts, a Gen Z UCO member called out the government on the state of the economy and how it's difficult for UCO members who live in a different city from their families to survive. And a few days afterwards, there was a quick payout for the UCO members in terms of their alawi, what we call alawi, their allowance in Nigeria. Now, it might not have been due to what she said, but whatever action and inaction and pressure she put on the government, it resulted in that implementation being, rushed through just to ensure that the UCO members are in one way or the other comfortable by an increase in their allowances. And we've seen different instances where other Gen Zs, I mean, I find a way of calling them Gen Zs, I'll say young people, but other Gen Zs, men and women alike, are very quick to call out the government. And there is no holdback. Our generation would hold back. There'll be a bit of, for lack of a better word, respect. We will try to color things, but we're trying to speak the truth and draw the government's attention to what is happening. But Gen Zs are very blunt, and they don't really care how you take it or what happens afterwards. What they know is they have told you, and you should do right by them by taking action almost immediately. I think it's pretty impressive. I think at this point is what Africa needs, because we can't keep coloring and painting good pictures when you're suffering in silence. So I think it's really important. Then for your second question about how there can be
a bridge.
We
need to work together.
That would be hard. It would be the hardest thing, except there is a clear communication. Because Gen Zs, I have seen, can be a bit irritable. If you're not honest and upfront with them, if you try to suppress what they want, they throw in the towel and move on to the next thing, because they believe that whether or not it's a new thing for them, they will thrive. They are open to taking risks. A millennial would stay at a job they are not treated right, hoping that it will get better. A Gen Z would give you an initial warning about how they're being treated, have the conversation with you, and if nothing changes, they leave you hanging. They don't even give you what was it called now? How do you resign? A resignation letter. They just text you one morning, oh hey, I'm not coming through. Do what you want with that, and they move on. But I think with clear communication, between both groups,
both
and a bit of
generations,
understanding. I think with that, and respect as well, respect across board, because we are big on respect, but we don't respect other people due to whatever reason. Once we're able to walk around these options, I believe there will be that understanding, and it will chart a course towards making a change eventually.
Yeah, and I think that you made a very valid point. We are two different generations, but we are within the youth generation in a way, and so it's like a young generation made up of two different generations with distinct features. What a Gen Z would not tolerate, a millennial would be like, okay, we can work through this, I can rationalize this and manage it for a period of time. But a Gen Z would be like, nah, this is where I draw the lines. I'm not going to get involved in this for my mental health. They also
it's always their mental health,
always about that. But I think there's something you said about we need to communicate and speak with each other and respect and listen to each other. Because in the advocacy to make our democracy work, in the advocacy to get a system that is inclusive where women's voices are represented, then we need both generations to work as allies. What strengths can we pull from you, and what strengths can we pull from this? And how do we use that together as our power, or our power block to move forward? And so, Tam Esther, you were sharing your thoughts around the policy issues Gen Z women care about, and also what can be done to get younger women's voices heard and get them in politics.
Oh, when you guys are talking about the attributes of Gen Z, I was just smiling because these are factual. You guys have to bear with also. Maybe it's the too much awareness that is out there. Yeah. So for us, there's not too much when it comes to political leadership, because most of them are busy, finding livelihood for themselves. And I also like the U-turn that is happening right now. The economic resilience, that, Gen Z women, young women basically, are now taking the route to them. In terms of the policy, there are few of us who are actually there to actually, speak up, for these things. And when you talk, for me, I am more keen about the age from 18 to 25. For me, that's what I see as young, actually, for me. And this is where I want to see leadership.
Thank you for calling us
Thank
old.
you.
Well done. You have tried. But continue.
No, yesterday I had a conversation with my dad, and he told me that when you want wisdom, don't go to young people. Or when you want knowledge, go to young people. So basically, we cannot take that from you guys.
Okay.
Yes, so that's what it is now back of my mind, that when I want wisdom, I should go to older people. They actually have a lot that they can offer. And now talking about the strategies, basically, for me, I think it has to do with lot of mentorship, for these young women, first of all, to building their confidence. And go beyond the stereotype mindset that is going on, even though there has been move. But I'll tell you, it's not much. We want more. We wanted 50%. They gave us 30%, right?
Yeah.
And part of this 30% of those who are actually achieving it, as I described, are most times older women, not young women between the ages that I actually described, 18. So even 26, you don't see them much of them there. So I think, first of all, confidence needs to be instilled in them. And when we talk about confidence, it also has to do popularization of laws. For instance, yes, we have passed the GIWI Act and all of that. When they have passed it, what next? What about the popularization? And I remember I was in the civil society space and I was telling them that, you are talking about, giving out the messaging. Don't forget these young people, because we made up the most part of the population. Don't forget young women. Let them know about these laws, because we used to say catch them young. I know about these laws. I'll start developing myself or developing my political ambition. So when I am there, I am able to get it. And as well as mentorship, we need lots and lots of mentorship. Now we have so many women who are in parliament, right? We want to see how best, they have this thing called female parliamentarians, how they can find, maybe they just open it 5. I, as a female parliamentarian, I will mentor 5 girls who are interested. You have to look at those who are interested to get into the political space as well. You mentor them, give that open, feel for more mentorship. I tell you, the more we get mentorship, sometimes we don't need the money. And I like the way how the way young people, especially young female, are taking up on opportunities. Sometimes it's not the money that we need, but that knowledge that you impact is in us will actually make us to have triple of that money that you think. That's what we are actually diving into. So for me, I think mentorship, building confidence, popularizing the laws that protect or give chances, to women at an early stage can be a best strategies in terms of getting us at that level.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samesa. What would be your one call to action to young people?
My one call to action would really be that I think it's in the best interest of all of us, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in South Africa and globally, to be very involved in the democracy. Democracy literally means people governing themselves and not governments governing people. And so I think a lot of young people, they need to step up and find ways that we can govern ourselves, because that is the only way. We cannot give up on democracy. We have to fix democracy. So one of the things we always say at Rivonia Circle is that we need to innovate democracy. There are parts of our democracy that work, but we must fix the parts that don't before we say that democracy is a bad system.
And I'll have a general question for you, and I'll begin with my co-host. A lot has been said around the bridging the gap between generations. You're a typical millennial like myself. Before we take risk, we calculate everything. We don't just wake up and be like, I'm not showing up to work. We would say, if I don't show up today, will I be able to feed myself this week? So before I make any decision, I have a plan. Gen Z will just wake up and be like, I'm done. I'll find my, what's that thing? They say, we'll sort it out. We'll sort it out. And I'm just wondering, what can we learn from I'll call it the Gen Z culture. What can we learn from that in our advocacy to getting more women into politics? That's one. And I want to get your perspective on this. And then to every young woman listening, what will be your message to every young woman listening? You can also chip into the question I'll train to.
First is what can we learn from the Gen Z?
Yes, as we are pushing and advocating for women participation, and then our final words.
I think we can learn their fearlessness. They are so fearless. They don't care.
True.
And by the time we millennials, if we learn that, we'll stop holding back.
True.
We'll just air our voice, air our opinion, and we move on. And I think that will really help us go far.
Yeah. Fearlessness.
Advocating for women.
Yeah. What do you think?
I would say learning that age is just a number. It doesn't show maturity.
Yes.
Oh, right. Once we're able to get, beyond the age factor, I think we'll make a lot of progress.
Yeah. Age is just a number. What would be your own lesson? Maybe before I come to you, Semester, what is that message you want any young woman listening to take away today?
I say go for it. Go for what you want to achieve, right? There might be certain factors in place that are holding you back, but your input is very important and it will make all the difference.
Go for it. Semester, what do you think we can learn in this women's movement?
For me, I think it's acceptance. They need to accept that the way they do things, we don't do things that way. We are different. Our energy that flows through us is so different. When you come with me to a space, the way I engage people is different from the way you will engage people. We're not a shame at all. There is no shame in us, Gen Z. People need to start accepting this thing, that this is the way we are. And definitely, when you want to reach out to certain audience, you have to use this Gen Z or these young people themselves. And when he was talking about age is just a normal, this also has to come with acceptance. Gone are those days you have to reach 30 years to start an initiative. Now we see 15 years, 17 years are now taking the lead. So they need to create that space for intergenerational conversation and intergenerational collaboration. So everyone will be able to put hands on deck, and they need to stop discriminating us because of our age. Let them look at maturity, please. All
right. That message to a young girl, a young woman listening, what will be your message to her?
You just need to start. Like everything is not going to meet you. You have to start. You have to make your move. You have to leave your comfort zone, and then every other thing will add.
Exactly. Start, leave your comfort zone. And I think it's been an interesting conversation. What matters is that when we talk about youth and the influence of voice in Africa, the message is clear. We need a generational movement. We need to work together if we want our democracy to work. And I think Kanya mentioned the fact that for now, there's no alternative to democracy. We can only innovate, reinvent, get it to work for us, or we cannot say, no, we don't want democracy. Because at the end of it all, the only system of government where you can guarantee the power of the voice of the people, where you can guarantee participation of the people, is democracy. And for democracy to work, especially in Africa, young people need to be part of the conversation. If they say data says 3/4 of our population, you can imagine that out of 4, 3 are young people. Basically, that's what it means. So what it means basically is that we need to get involved, get engaged, and for Nigerian youths, because I think there's a lot more discouragement in Nigeria. Nigerian youths are giving up a lot more than our counterparts in other. Wait, I'm not even youth anymore. Nigerian youth are giving up a lot more, and I'm hoping that we, Nigerian youth, are conscious and aware that there is power in this generation. Indeed. Thank you so much, our guest, for this amazing conversation. I would leave it to Quincy White to reach out to speak to our audience.
All right, thank you. First and first, shout out to our guests. You guys rocked. Shout out to our behind-the-scene crew, our cinematographer, Fredcoker, our sound engineer, DJ Drexx, our director, Hamilton Odems. Shout out to Ayor and Alan. He is also an assistant cinematographer. And shout out to me. Yes.
This one you're shouting out to yourself now. And to our audience, don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms at the Unamplified Podcast on Twitter, on X, on Instagram, on Threads, and on TikTok. Also, you can find us on Spotify at the Unamplified Podcast. Do not forget to click that subscribe button, and drop a comment for us. Let us know, would you vote for a woman and why? Whatever answer you put in, tell us why. And my final appreciation to our guest. Thank you so much, Itodo, for being part of this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
We tried to pull you one time. You were not available. So I'm happy we finally got you.
Thank you for having me.
Sam Esther, my girl. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. You know now, when I was in Sierra Leone, this chick, she made my stay an interesting one. She was really helpful. And to Kania, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. All right, like we always end every episode, when you're on, you're amplified. And cheers to Africa.
Cheers to Africa.